Hello guys, welcome to my humble YouTube channel where I bring you fanfiction that will brighten your days. Before we start, a subscribe is greatly appreciated, and don't forget to leave a like and ring the bell icon so you won't miss exciting new fanfiction stories. True God in Another Worlds, Tensura x Tbate, by Tempest_King_20. Chapter 30 Adventure Plans. Rimuru Pav. As Arthur was about to release Static Void, I saw him lose consciousness and start to fall to the ground. My heart dropped, and I immediately rushed over to him, my legs moving faster than they ever had before. I knelt by his side and caught him in my arms just before he hit the ground. The world around me seemed to fade away as I focused solely on his well-being. I carefully examined him, checking for any injuries and grateful to find none. My gaze then shifted to his face, and I couldn't help but curse myself inwardly. I had let my anger take over and let my younger brother deal with something that I should have handled. If it wasn't for CL's help, I wouldn't have known what to do. I let out a sigh. Everyone's going to be worried out of their mind once this is all over. I felt a surge of guilt at the thought of having to make them worry. I was jolted out of my thoughts when I suddenly heard a loud shriek and looked over to its source. Lily. She looks away from Sebastian's crippled body while covering Eleanor's eyes with her body. I inwardly breathed a sigh of relief. I was grateful. No one needed to witness such a sight, especially at such a young age. It took a few moments before everyone else in the room began moving, rushing over to us to make sure we were safe. I handed Arthur to my father, who looked at him with concern, while my mom had tears in her eyes as she caressed his face. Then she hugged me. Uncle Vincent looked at the king and his royal guards in disbelief. Fwez. Gasp. Gasp. Health. Gasp. Me? Sebastian, the dying ingrate mumbled while hyperventilating. The queen quickly took charge, dishing out orders to her staff while the king remained in a state of shock. As I watched, my anger began to build, and the room's temperature seemed to drop several degrees. I approached the king, and both he and the queen looked at me with surprise, no doubt taken aback by my sudden change in demeanor. From the corner of my eye, I could also see that the ice princess had changed her stoic face to one of surprise. The actions of your guard were unacceptable, I said with intensity, my voice laced with rage. He attacked 2 children because of his own ego and ignorance. What kind of people are you allowing to serve you? I then continued, we will accept nothing less than the immediate removal of these so-called royal guards from service and the assurance that they are never reinstated again in any capacity of nobility or guard for the next 100 years. My anger seethed through my words, and I made sure the king understood the gravity of the situation. The queen appeared to grasp the severity of the situation and bowed her head, apologizing for their guards' actions. Why yes. We're sorry for our guards' actions. I waited for the king's response, and he looked at me with a mix of shock and fear before finally nodding his head in agreement. We will also send you some gold as an apology, and now if why you'll excuse us. I nodded, satisfied with his response, but I couldn't help myself from adding one last threat. You better pray that my brother wakes up and that he is okay. If anything happens to him, I will hold you personally responsible. Why yes, of course. We understand the situation. We'll take proper measures and act to it accordingly. The queen responded. They then hurriedly took their leave before I could say something else. Everyone in the room was left dumbfounded by what had just happened, their mouths agape, and an eerie silence lingered in the air. What? I asked in an innocent voice and making my face as cute as possible, trying to dissipate some of the tension. Remind us never to make you annoyed, Mother said, and everyone nodded in agreement. I couldn't help but chuckle at their reactions. Well, it pissed me off a lot, but thankfully, it seems like everything will work out in the end. I can't believe he had the audacity to ask you to give up your bond, Uncle Vincent grumbled. He's a king, he could buy any bond he wanted that wasn't already taken, but no, he wanted to take yours. After that, we left the auction house with Arthur still unconscious in our dad's arms and headed back home. The journey was silent, as we all contemplated the gravity of what had just transpired. Gah! My head. My brother's scream brought me back to look at him as he lay awake on our shared bed, clutching his head in pain. You finally woke up, I sighed with relief. You sounded like a sleeping princess. Is that what you say to your brother after he stops you from destroying the whole city? Arthur let out a weak chuckle, though his face was twisted in pain. I shrugged, grinning mischievously. I wasn't going to do that. I might just torture the king and his mage so that their screams would be heard throughout the continent, I said as I returned my attention to what I was doing.
My brother wore a terrified face. You are really scary, brother.
I suppose spending so much time among demons has a way of changing one's character, I said, remembering Diablo and the devilish trio. Arthur groaned and clutched his head. What happened? How long was I out for? He asked, his confusion evident. You were unconscious for over 8 hours, I replied with a light laugh. Our parents have been worried sick about you. Just then, Sylvie stirred awake from her spot on the couch, her ears perking up as she caught sight of Arthur. Uncle, she cried, leaping onto Arthur's lap and smothering him with licks. Hee, that tickles Sylvie, Arthur said as he grabbed Sylvie and placed her on his lap. Anyway, what have you been up to while I was sleeping? Do you remember the spell Sylvia used when we first met? Art nodded. I'm trying to do a similar spell on this ring, I said, tossing him the ring I'd been working on. So that's what you've been doing for the past weeks, Art said, inspecting the ring. Did it work? Just this ring, I said as I stood up from the desk. I'm trying to make lots of it, but it's going to cost me a lot. Can I have it? Arthur tilted his head. You don't need it, I said and moved closer to him. I was originally thinking of making runes that look like mine with Sylvie, but then I got the idea for the ring. If I understand correctly, you want to place these runes on me, he said.
I nodded. Yeah, this way we both can communicate mentally, and with the relationship with me you can also talk with Sylvie and Sylvia.
Oh right, I forgot to ask you. I heard a voice speaking to me in my mind when we were at the auction. Do you know her? It's Seal, I said and he nodded. So shall we try this? Arthur said with a little enthusiasm and I chuckled. It may burn you a little or hurt, but be patient. Arthur nodded enthusiastically, lifting up his t-shirt sleeve to reveal his arm. I carefully placed the runes on his skin, chanting the words of the spell as I did so. As I finished, I watched as the runes glowed a soft blue before fading away. Did it work? Arthur asked, inspecting his arm. I concentrated and tried to speak mentally to him. Can you hear me? I can. Arthur exclaimed. Great, I said, feeling a sense of accomplishment. Now try to speak back to me. Arthur closed his eyes and took a deep breath, then he mentally projected his voice. Hey, can you hear me? Yes, loud and clear, I replied mentally. How does it feel? It's weird, but also kind of cool, Arthur said, sounding amazed. I know, right, it's like we have a secret language, I said with a chuckle. Try to communicate with Sylvie and Sylvia now. Arthur paused for a moment, then he projected his voice again. Hey, can you guys hear me? Sylvie can hear you, Uncle, Sylvie's voice echoed in my mind. Oh Arthur, is that you? I suspect it worked after all. Rimuru, Sylvia's voice rang in my mind. Less than hi Arthur, it's good to talk to you again, greater than said Seal. Oh, so you're Seal, my brother's partner, Arthur said. Less than yes, greater than, wow, this is amazing, Arthur exclaimed, grinning widely. I couldn't agree more, I said, feeling elated. Now, we can communicate with each other effortlessly, even in the midst of chaos. I couldn't help but feel proud of my work. This new form of communication would definitely come in handy, especially when we were out on dangerous missions. The door slowly creaked open, and in walked our mother. Relief washed over her face as she saw Art awake. You're finally awake, she exclaimed, rushing towards us in a flurry of emotions. She embraced Art tightly, tears forming in her eyes and leaving a moist trail down her cheeks. The doctor said that you most likely passed out due to shock and that you would wake up soon. However, I didn't think soon would be 8 hours.
She ran her fingers gently through his hair, giving him a tender smile. It was evident from her red eyes that she had been crying for a while. From the mental bond between us, I could feel the bitterness in Art's mouth as he regretted making her worry once again.
I should teach him HIW to shield his thoughts. It would be disturbing for me to hear all his thoughts, so I must teach him, and it is not only I who can hear him. I can make Seal, Sylvia, and Sylvie hear if I let them. What happened after I passed out? He asked. We all left shortly after you fell unconscious. No one was in their right state of mind, thus the royal family excused themselves first. Well, it was more like they left after being scared off by a certain someone. She gave me a slight smile, which gave Art more than enough information on what really happened. Art gave me a quick glance before asking, "Where's everyone else?" "Your father is downstairs with the king's representative. They're in the living room discussing what happened. Your sister and Lilia are both asleep. Vincent and Tabitha are still at the auction house," Mom replied calmly. "Oh, so they're finally here, are they?" I asked, and our mom nodded. We slowly made our way downstairs with Mother after she checked in on Ellie, who was sound asleep in her room. As we descended down the stairs, I could distinctly hear my father's voice, along with an older man's hoarse voice. Pushing the living room door open, I spotted my father and the king's representative. They were sitting on the couches, eyes locked in fierce argument. The older man noticed me first and quickly rose from his seat to bow slightly. My father turned around and saw us at the doorway. He quickly hurled himself over the couch and took Art into a bear hug, his hands cupping the back of Art's head, and I could see a visible release of tension on his face. "Arthur, you're awake," Father exclaimed, his voice crackling with emotion. Art smiled weakly, glad to see that our father was overjoyed about his recovery. "Yeah, Dad, I'm fine. What are you guys talking about?" My father's lip curled up as he answered, each word dripping with venom. "This representative came by with a few gold coins as a token of apology from the king for the small incident." His voice hit a low register as he spoke, clearly upset at the situation. "The royal family has also ordered me to inform the Lewin family that both guards attacked Arthur and Rimuru Lewin lost their nobility title," the representative added, his voice cracking. My father's anger only grew upon hearing this news. For almost killing my sons, the king. He just slapped them on the wrist. And then waved them goodbye. He growled. My father couldn't help but be livid from the frustration. "Father, it's all right, look, I wasn't hurt. Let's end this matter." Art squeezed our father's hand, giving him a reassuring look. The representative just looked at us matter-of-factly, as if it was a given that whatever the king had done was the right thing. I could feel the frustration radiating from my father, and I was equally fed up with the whole debacle as well. Letting out a sigh, I took a seat. I'm too tired for this crap. Casting aside the issue, I asked about Sebastian. In case he'd said anything. What happened to that conjurer? The one who had his limbs broken? The representative just shook his head a little. "We don't know. Our experts hypothesized that it was due to the mana that the knight attacked you with ricocheting and hitting his limbs." As the representative got up to leave, I called out to him, "Wait." He suddenly stopped and froze where he stood. He turned around and met my eyes. I didn't say anything, I just looked menacingly into his eyes. "I am sure I explained myself very well there, that it is not possible to bring them back to the position of peerage and royal guard, for 100 years, that is other than monetary compensation." I projected an air of dominance to show that I had no patience for his objections. "I don't think." I gave him a taste of killing intent that caused him to recoil in fear and backtrack. "Why yes. We accept this deal, I'll go and report to the king immediately." The representative quickly scurried away with a sense of urgency. He quickly took his leave, while sighing in my place. My father was still in shock, so Art tapped his shoulder to snap him out of it. My dad said, "Wow, that was incredible, Ree." He praised with an approving nod. "Now we won't have to worry about them being guards ever again." He finished with a chuckle. My father turned to Art with a beaming smile, patting his son on the back with pride. "Good job knocking out that augmenter. That's my son." The two then did their father-son fist bump, beaming at each other with joy. "Where are the twin horns anyway? I thought they'd be here." Art's curiosity piqued once again as he asked. My mother answered while chuckling, "We had to keep them away from this. Otherwise, they might have turned into wanted criminals." I laughed at this, but I could tell that it was something they were genuinely worried about by the helpless look on my father's face. According to my father, the twin horns were waiting at a nearby inn. He told me that we'd head out there tomorrow for breakfast, and would discuss me and Art being an adventurer with them. I nodded at this and went back into my room. Our birthday was in less than 2 weeks. We'd finally be able to make our first mark here in this world. We went to our room and unwrapped the package that Uncle Vincent had left beside our bed. Art got a completely white mask that was able to cover my entire face. It was a simple mask, with 2 sharp eye slits that curved upwards. It reminded me of a fox's eyes. There was no nose or mouth hole, just a singular blue streak that ran straight down the left side of the mask,
Through the left eye slit, my mask was similar to it, except it had a black streak instead of blue. I tried the mask on, amazed at how it clung to my face without the need for a strap. However, the black coat that came with it was a little long for my liking. However, once I strapped it on, it mysteriously shrank to fit my body perfectly. I felt embarrassed and slightly ridiculous wearing it, but at the same time, a thrill of excitement started to build within me. Testing. Testing. The tone of my voice surprised me. It sounded completely different. My immature, high-pitched voice had become a rich, baritone. Sylvie just looked at me curiously, causing me and Art to laugh and take off my mask. Art patted Sylvie's head, grinning at her. Aren't you excited? Don't you want to get a little bit of action as well, Sylvie? He asked playfully, his eyes sparkling with anticipation and adventure. Art turned to me, a grin on his face. So, are you ready for some adventure, Rimuru? I felt a surge of excitement and anticipation wash over me. Definitely. But make sure you won't be a hindrance to me, I teased, grinning back at him. His response was a playful punch on my shoulder, as we laughed and jumped onto the bed. The next day. So, who's it going to be? My father took a sip of his coffee, setting it down on the round wooden table we were all seated around. We had been currently just finished eating breakfast with the Twin Horns party. The group had chosen a modest inn full of lively chatter. They conversed while eating breakfast. My mother was currently wiping off the remains of food chunks, bits of food that had managed to escape my sister's mouth off of her. Sylvie hopped up onto the table, with her head held high. Even without her mentally transmitting, I'm enough to protect Papa and Uncle. Everyone was able to tell that's what she was thinking. Sylvie, come here. My sister waggled a piece of meat in front of the legendary dragon bond, instantly tempting her with its tantalizing aroma. Sylvie couldn't resist, and she leapt into my sister's arms, drooling eagerly at the prospect of getting to savor the juicy meat. When I saw this, I couldn't help but chuckle at the thought of Sylvie wagging her tail at a bandit smart enough to simply lure her away with a piece of meat. Apparently my father's ex-party members had just finished a dungeon exploration with several other parties, so they had some free time before their next mission or quest. Thus, it wasn't really a matter of if they had the time, but rather if any of them wanted to. Adam, who spoke up first while polishing the tip of his spear, was the first to speak up. Babysitting doesn't really fit my style, so I'll pass on this. Besides, I feel like, with my personality, they might kill me in my sleep one day. Despite the joke, my father responded with a solemn nod. He knew what kind of temperament Adam had, and in turn, knew that we weren't likely to get along with each other. Anyone else? I was actually hoping that Durden or Helen would accompany Arthur and Rimuru. Honestly, although I can't offer much, Alice and I are more than willing to compensate you guys in whatever way we can if you do this. Don't talk like that, Ray. We're all family here. I, for one, would love to accompany them and watch them grow. Anyhow, the gentle giant responded, his narrow eyes becoming even smaller as he smiled. Durden is right. You, of all people, should know that we aren't doing this for the money. Besides, we managed to get quite a bit of treasure off of our last dungeon raid. Helen said, shaking her head. Suddenly, a silent hand shot up, making everyone at the table turn to look. Jasmine. You want to go with Rimuru and Arthur? Angela sputtered, looking at her brusque companion in shock. Logically speaking, Jasmine is the most suitable person to protect them. Durden only specializes in offensive area of effect spells. Although, I want to go with either of them too. I feel I'm probably not the most suitable person since protecting someone isn't my strong suit. Helen scratches her head. Jasmine, are you okay with going along with Rimuru and Arthur? My mother asked, concerned. Giving my mother a determined look, she looked at my mother with determination in her gaze as she nodded firmly in response. PFF'd. The lady says she wants to go. Let her go. She's the only augmenter among us that has an elemental affinity. She just reached the soiled yellow stage last year and coupled with her wind attribute. I think she'd be the best suited. Adam said, chuckling as he leaned back on his chair. For their safety, I guess I'll have to step down from this. It's a pity though. Durden just scratched his head, clearly disappointed. Sorry, Durden, I know how much you care about the two of them. My father put an arm on the massive mage's shoulder. Maybe we'll join the Twin Horns on a dungeon raid in the future. Arthur exclaimed. Durden just smiled at this, giving Arthur a nod as he tousled his hair. The rest of the Twin Horns chuckled as we finished up our conversation. We decided that in a week, we would go with Jasmine to the Adventurers Guild and register ourselves. We would automatically start as an E-class adventurer after we passed a simple test and could. Depending on how well we do on any missions or quests we take, our class rises accordingly. Getting back home, I caught sight of Lily downstairs in the living room. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor, her eyes closed in deep meditation. As I approached, a maid placed a cup of water by her side, careful not to disturb her. I couldn't help but admire Lily's discipline and dedication. As I stood there watching her, my thoughts began to wander. With the pace at which Lily was progressing, there was no doubt that she would soon break through to the dark red stage, before Arthur and I go on an adventure. It was impressive how much she had achieved in such a short period of time. On the other hand, Ellie didn't have the patience for training and grew bored after an hour or two, so it would take her a lot longer. That's fine. I wouldn't want her to become a mage too early, as she would attract too much unwanted attention. I would be proud if she could form a mana core by the age of 9 or 10. Arthur laid his jacket on the bed and faced father, who was still making his way up the stairs. Dad, can we go to the auction house again? I would like to pick out a sword. We never had the chance to after the incident, and I've wanted to start practicing. Both Lily's father and mother were already waiting for us at their auction house. It was our first time seeing either of them after the incident. So Art was faced with another long string of questions from the two of them regarding his health. After much coaxing and reassuring them that he was fine, we finally went inside. Bah, I bet those guards will get their positions back when things have died down a little. Uncle Vincent voiced out his dissatisfaction. That's what I would have thought too. But luckily, Ree made sure that couldn't happen. Father said with a smile. Oh, again. Tell us more. Tabitha said with a raised eyebrow and smirked at me. Again? Art asked, clearly confused. Let's just say I threatened the royal family, I said with a sly grin. Father explained what happened at the manor yesterday and they all burst out laughing. I knew you had it in you, Ree, Uncle Vincent said, chuckling. That certainly sounds like him, Aunt Tabitha giggled. Anyway, Uncle, is it all right if we pick out our weapons now? We didn't have a chance to yesterday. I said. Sure. We have all types of weapons at the back. It may not be the best, but I'm sure I could find you some better weapons when your bodies are more mature. He made a stance of holding a sword and started to swing his arms. Father went off with Uncle Vincent to meet the guards, while Aunt Tabitha took our carriage back to take care of Lily, leaving only us two with Sylvie searching for a sword. As we made our way through the storage hall, Sylvie curiously looked around the cluttered space, littered with vaguely sorted crates and shelves of miscellaneous goods. Uncle Vincent had told me that the Helstia auction house stored a lot of goods, most from different merchants and adventurers, and others from remote places, including the Dwarf Kingdom. I had learned while living with the Aerolith family in Elenoir that while weapons and armor forged by dwarves were considered the highest class, elves had their specialties in bows, conjurer staffs, and wands. However, due to the war over a neutral territory, there had been almost no business transactions done with elves. Over the years, the relations between the two races had improved, but it would be a slow process before the enmity between them actually ceased. This was a shame since elf weapons, which were comparatively lighter and thinner, would have been perfect for someone of my stature. As we made our way through the endless rows of shelves and racks filled with swords, I picked out a few to test. However, it didn't take long before I stuffed each of them back on the shelf, unsatisfied with their crude workmanship. The balance between the blade and the grip was off, and they were shaped sloppily, making them suitable only for simple swings or thrusts. Despite not considering myself overly picky when it came to swords, after hours of scouring through the room, it was clear that my taste had become too particular for the weapons in the auction house. As I continued to search for the perfect sword, Sylvie grew bored of the repeated actions of removing a sword, swinging it a few times, and unhappily putting it back in place. She hopped off my head and began to have her own little adventure, exploring the rest of the storage hall. As I continued my search for the perfect sword, I couldn't help but notice that swords in this world fell into a few categories. There were the large swords, either wide and heavy or long claymores, preferred by many warriors and offensive augmenters for their raw power, but considered savage and unrefined by others. Then there were more balanced swords, commonly used by knights and adventurers alike, known as broadswords. These were generally wielded with one hand, coupled with a shield in the other, but two-handed varieties also existed. The broadswords provided the most balanced and versatile performances and were the standard swords used when beginning to learn swordsmanship. The last category of swords were the lighter and thinner blades, including weapons like sabers, katanas, and rapiers, as well as daggers. These weapons were focused on speed and precision, with sabers, katanas, and rapiers being designed to cater to these aspects. On the other hand, daggers were often used as concealed weapons, or dual-wielded with another dagger, providing more versatile and acrobatic styles of fighting. It didn't take long for that bubble to pop. Letting out a defeated sigh from my fruitless search for a sword, I mindlessly swung the plain short sword I had picked out earlier and barely deemed acceptable. I would have to settle for this sword if I couldn't find anything else. Giving up on the search for a better sword, I made my way into the miscellaneous section where they held different types of weapons. I could see various unique, albeit inefficient, weapons that looked like they were designed by a child. Phew. Looks like a dead-end Sylvie. I sat down on the ground, leaning against a gigantic shield as Sylvie continued to trot about. A sudden excited chirp from Sylvie caught my attention, and I dragged myself up to investigate. Dust filled the air as Sylvie diligently dug through a pile of discarded weapons, her determination unwavering. Amidst the cloud of dust, Sylvie triumphantly pointed a paw in the direction of an unremarkable black rod. It seemed insignificant, almost resembling a simple walking cane, yet something about it intrigued me. I approached the rod cautiously, my fingers curling around its unassuming exterior. To my surprise, it held a surprising weight, contradicting its seemingly lightweight appearance. Though appearing to be made of polished wood, there was an unmistakable density to it, defying expectations of a mundane walking stick. I held it up to the light, scrutinizing its features with growing curiosity.
Art. I got an interesting sword for you, I telepathically informed my brother, sensing his waning hope for discovering a suitable weapon. Really, I'm starting to give up on these weapons, Arthur replied, his weariness evident, as he made his way towards us. When he arrived, he looked at me confused and bewildered. Where is the sword? I threw him the sword and said, use your beast will. Arthur's eyes opened wide, but he nodded in understanding. He activated his dragon will. A light tug was all it took for the sword to glide out of its sheath. The sword slid soundlessly from its sheath to reveal the translucent teal hue of the blade. Titling her tiny head, Sylvie let out a happy chirp in response. The narrow blade was straight and thin like a rapier's but had a double edge, making it fit for slashing as well as thrusting. There were no markings on the blade, leaving a clean, beautiful teal color that seemed to generate a luster of its own. The matte black handle made the blade even more radiant. Dawn's ballad WKIV, he whispered, high voice barely audible in the room, but was quickly cut off by a pained grunt from Arthur, and the sword fell to the ground. Arthur! I practically yelled, alarmed by his sudden distress. Hugh, are you okay, Uncle? Sylvie trotted next to Arthur, pawing his leg, concerned. Her concern palpable. I'm fine, Sylv. After scratching the underside of my bond shin, he gave the sword another swing. This time, the point of balance aligned perfectly to match his undeveloped body. Even the handle seemed to have grown smaller to fit in his hand. As if it was for him. Less than oh, looks like you found something interesting. I didn't expect one of his swords to be here. Greater than Sylvia, observing our discovery, chimed in with amusement. Curiosity aroused, I asked. Greater than you seem to know the sword maker. Less than. A smile played on Sylvia's lips as she responded. Less than yes, the sword maker is a famous Asura on my continent. Greater than I see. Less than. Taking a moment to absorb this information, I nodded in understanding. Suddenly,
Sylvia shifted the conversation to a different topic. Less than by the way, I wanted to ask you about the person they brought to the palace, greater than him. Who are you referring to? Less than the one has a broken foot. He was shouting all over the place that he's the king mage and so on. Greater than, she continued. A mix of irritation and protectiveness welled up within me as I remembered the incident. Greater than, oh, you mean that scumbag? Less than, I replied, my voice laced with suppressed anger. Intrigued by my strong reaction, Sylvia questioned, less than what did he do to provoke such a response from you? Greater than, Sylvia said. With a deep sigh, I recounted the unsettling events. Greater than, sigh, he tried to take Sylvie. Less than, I said, my voice laced with a seething intensity. Less than what? Rimuru, can I kill him? Greater than, she exclaimed, her voice filled with rage. I nodded, urging her on. Greater than, do whatever you want. After his death, Seal will deal with him after that. Less than, I declared. A mischievous grin appeared on Sylvia's face as she eagerly contemplated her revenge. Less than, oh, what do you have in mind? Seal, greater than, she inquired, turning her attention to Seal. Seal joined our conversation, her tone icily calm. Less than him. I haven't decided yet, but I believe subjecting him to the torment of demons is the least we can do. He dared to lay a hand on Sylvie, and for that, he will face the consequences. Greater than, she declared, a chilling determination resonating in her voice. Less than, feel free to revel in your vengeance. I will continue my search for a sword. Greater than, I said. Turn my attention back to Art. Well, it looks like you found yourself a unique and powerful weapon, I said to Art with a smile. Sylvia just told me that. Art looked at the sword in his hand, still in awe of its beauty and power. I can feel it, Art said, his eyes shining with excitement. There's something special about this sword, something I've never felt before. I realized how much time had passed as my father's faint voice snapped us out of infatuated trance. Quickly sheathing his new sword, we made our way back to where father was, Sylvie hitching a ride on top of my heads. On the way back, I pick up the short sword I chose for and Art do the same. I didn't see an interesting sword, so I took a regular katana that fit my small body size. Ah, you're back, my Uncle Vincent said, greeting us with a smile. Did you find what you were looking for? We nodded, holding up the short sword to him. I found this sword, I said, holding up my katana. After a few swings, I've grown to like it. Is it okay for me to take this one? My Uncle Vincent took the weapon from my hand, drawing the sword. Not the best quality sword, he murmured, examining the blade and handle. But it's solid and won't break easily. Ray, what do you think? Father inspected the sword, examining its blade and handle carefully. The balance isn't the best. I think it'll be good as a first sword. What's that stick you're holding onto, though? Our father pointed at Don's ballad. Trying not to make a big deal out of it, Art gave a casual shrug. I tripped over this sturdy stick on my way back here. Do you mind if I take this back home to practice? Uncle Vincent. Ah, that old thing. I remember one of my merchants telling me how some senile man just handed it to him, mumbling something about finding a worthy master. We had a few of our inspectors check if there was anything special about it. For all they were able to find out, it was just a sturdy, hard cane. It's been gathering dust here. If you think it'll do you some good, go ahead and take it, Uncle Vincent answered, lightly squeezing Art's shoulder. Success.